Hello, I'm Dr. Sasha Lesson, and I'd like to tell you about one of my ancestors, Abraham, and some of his so-called chosen people. He first comes onto the ancient historical record, Abraham does, when Yahweh, who was known in those days as Enlil, head of the Annunaki gold mining expedition to Earth, chose Abram. He gave him a better name, called him Abraham, and to be top general of his army. Abraham was the son of one of Yahweh's Anunnaki earthling priests named Terah, whom Yahweh sent to Ur to make sure that his Yahweh's son Nanar was behaving himself and not trying to overthrow him. So that was Terah, Abraham's father, and Abraham, who was then called Abram, went to Ur, probably from the area of Haran. And there, the main deal that was happening was trade. But, Ur needed a general too, Yahweh felt. Well, there's a picture of Ur, a reconstruction. It's a magnificent city in its day. This is in Iraq. And the rival of Yahweh, whose name was Marduk in the ancient Akkadian accounts, Christians tend to call him Satan, and his son was coming from Egypt at this point, closing in on the spaceport that Yahweh had on the Sinai. And Marduk's son Nabu, who had suborned the Sodom and Gomorrah and Zoar, the cities of Canaan, in which a lot of the previous astronaut corps, the Igigi, or Nephilim, had settled. And they were all, both Marduk's and his son were then closing in on the spaceport that Yahweh and his son Utu ran on the Sinai Peninsula. And this was coming to a critical head. Enlil sent his spy, and here's my ancestor again, Abraham. Before he became a general, besides being a general, he was a spy too. What Abraham found was that Sodom and the cities of Canaan were indeed in Nabu's camp. Yahweh actually sent his son Ninurta, as well as his nephew Nergal, down to Sodom to check it out, and the people were so angry at these so-called angels, the emissaries of Yahweh, who just would kill people, and they didn't understand why. They tried to mob them, but Lot, Abraham's nephew, was able to hold them back, and they were able to report to Yahweh, hey, Sodom's gone over to Marduk and his people. And so Enlil, the commander of the earth force of Nibirans, the Anunnaki, communicated, calmed with his dad, Anu, King Anu, on the planet Nibiru. Would he have permission to nuke the spaceport and Sodom, or Marduk was going to now be able to take the spaceport and mobilize the humans he'd been training and come back and take over Nibiru, to which Marduk, thought he should be the king, and there was a treaty that said he was the king even. So Anu said, when Enlil asked him, yeah, go ahead and nuke him. So in 2025 BCE, the Nibirans, the Anunnaki, did indeed nuke Sinai, and they nuked Sodom. They actually, the Salt Sea, just above Sodom, so Sodom got washed out. All this is to stop Satan or Marduk. Full-on nuclear war. However, the nuclear storm from dropping the bombs on the Sinai and Canaan made this great big radiation cloud, and the two clouds joined, and they blew all over Yahweh's place, blew all over Iraq and Kuwait, and killed all the humans there. Of course, the Anunnaki saw this stuff coming, and they got the message to flee, and they jumped in their boats and planes and got the hell out of there, except for just one of them who stayed to help the humans who were all dying in the streets of Sumer from radiation poisoning. Enlil, of course, saved his general, and he had him get out of there. And when they were clear, he ordered the men in Abraham's band to circumcise themselves so that their phalluses would look like those of an Anunnaki. Anunnaki lacked foreskins. And that way, Yahweh could tell his earthlings from Marduk's earthlings. And Enlil did not like it that Abraham had a secondary wife who was Egyptian. Her name was Hagar. And his old wife, Abraham's old wife, Sarah, um, looked like she was past bearing and hadn't born any children. So, with her permission, whatever, he took Hagar, who was a princess of Egypt, as his secondary wife, and he had a child called Ishmael, who he raised to be the king of Canaan after he passed. However, Yahweh, Enlil, said, get rid of them, put them out in the desert. And that meant they're going to die, put them out in the desert. But Abraham did it. Then Abraham had another kid, this time with Sarah, probably by artificial insemination or some help with the Annunaki. They made her actually bear the second child, and even though she was 90 years old. And now this one, he'd already gotten rid of Ishmael. He was raising Isaac, an obedient, intelligent boy, to take over when he died. Abraham was then given the order by Yahweh, kill this one, kill Isaac. And, Abraham says, okay, boss. Well, one of Abraham's kids down the line, Jacob, that was his name, he got in a fight with one of these emissaries of the Annunaki, a guy from Nibiru. The Nibirians were usually a lot stronger, but Jacob actually beat this guy and pinned him down and wouldn't release him unless he got some kind of blessing. And the guy said, okay, I'll give you a blessing, let me go, and I'll give you the name Israel, which means you beat an Annunaki. And that's how Jacob, direct descendant of Abraham, son of Abraham, is going to begat the Jews ultimately. Jacob's son, Joseph, his younger son, was a dream interpreter. He was really good at it, and the old man really liked him. And his older brothers threw him down a well, kept him there until slavers came by with their camels, and they sold him to go to Egypt, and they covered up that that's what they had done. And so Joseph was taken off to Egypt as the direct descendant of Abraham, and he is a slave. He is working for a guy whose wife comes on to him. And he said, no way, I ain't going to do this. And she said, she runs and says, this guy came on to me, he's trying to seduce me. And so they threw Joseph in jail. But he kept on reading dreams in jail. He became famous reading in dreams in jail. People came to the jail to visit him. And even after a while, the emperor of Egypt, the Pharaoh, heard about Jesus, because the Pharaoh had been having dreams, and he wanted to see what Joseph could do with those dreams. Joseph was famous, even from the jail. And so Pharaoh told Joseph his dream about fat cows and lean cows and so forth. And Joseph, he said, clearly that means you're going to have 7 good years and then 7 bad years. That was pretty impressive. He probably had some information from Yahweh. Anyway, so the Pharaoh said, hey, groovy, man, you're my man. I'm going to put you in charge of this place. And so Joseph, he was in charge, and he had him dig canals and store water in reservoirs and make granaries. He really made sure for 7 years that Egypt was ready for this famine that Yahweh told him was coming, and which he told Pharaoh, you better watch out, because they're coming. So there's a map showing where these granaries were. They were channeled off from the Nile into a place called the Fayum. You can see on the map where it is. And it's still a very, very green area. It's got canals and lakes, and Joseph did a good job, ready for the famine that would come when there was a drought in Canaan. And that's indeed what happened. And the famine refugees, including Israel, or Jacob, Joseph's father, and his brothers, were part of this refugee flood in 1840 BCE into Egypt from Canaan. But Joseph had a big heart. He welcomed his dad, of course, but his big heart was shown when he actually gave bienvenidos, welcome, to the brothers who had actually sold him into slavery. Things went well for the descendants of Jacob, who was called Israel, and hence his descendants were called the Israelites. They did fine for many, a long time, until there was a regime change in Egypt, and Marduk's allies, the Hyksos, and then some others that were loyal to Marduk, or Satan, who was known as Ra in Egypt. And they basically took over Egypt, and now, instead of being the honored descendants of Joseph, who had actually married into the Pharaoh's family, the Israelites, the descendants of Israel, Jacob, were seen as a fifth column by Marduk and his allies, and they were oppressed. They were treated as laborers. They were excluded from power as much as possible. Of course, Joseph had married into Egyptian royalty, and when his daughters had a child, and it was supposed to be killed because no child descended from Joseph in any way under Marduk was allowed to have any big honor. But Joseph's mother managed to get Hatshepsut, who winds up being Pharaoh later on, to raise the baby Moses, in one account of what happened to Moses. But he was an Egyptian prince, and through his mother, he was a Jew. When he grew up to be a young man, the prince absolutely could not stand the way the overseers were treating the Israelites. And, they were his relatives. And so he killed this one guy who was just, he was, doing a George Floyd on one of the Israelites, and Moses killed him. And so in the meantime, these astronomical disturbances that Yahweh had told Joseph were coming with some kind of asteroid or something coming close and disturbing. Pharaoh was about to go off in Stromboli, and things were, the ground was growling, and insects were being released, and there was and poisons and toxins in the undisturbed soil were being released, and cows were dying, and Moses said to Pharaoh, "Hey, you better let us go." He had been out, banished for killing the overseer, but then he'd been allowed to come back, and now he goes to the Pharaoh and says, "Hey, look, I'm half these people. Let me and them go." And things kept getting worse and worse. Okay, go, get the hell out of here. But it wasn't just the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob, that came. It was all the Egyptians. The buildings were crumbling. The oldest boys that slept on the first floor, this was their custom. They weren't warned. When all the toxins were released from the ground, they died. The Israeli boys had been ordered by Yahweh to sleep upstairs that night, so they didn't get killed. Anyway, they got out of there. They knew a route, how to get through the different kinds of waters that was flowing up and down the Nile and its tributaries back and forth. It's the same flood that wiped out Crete and sunk the Minoan fleet in Knossos. So as Moses' mob fled, and everywhere they went, they conquered. They murdered everybody in their way. And whenever they were having a hard time, they had techno weapons. In this picture, it comes a little bit later after Moses was dead. But Yahweh evidently told Joshua and his people how to use the sonar technology to crumble the walls of Jericho, where they killed everybody, and all the dogs and cats too, and they even killed their own people who picked up a gold bauble or two instead of giving it all to Yahweh. But anyway, they were ravaging through Canaan. These are the descendants of Abraham via Joseph, via Moses. They wandered through the Sinai, and Yahweh gave them direction at night with a pillar of flame. In the day, he made a cloud formation. He led them through, and he fed them manna from the sky. Probably concentrated food. Maybe had a little monoatomic gold in them to give them lots of power. He wandered all around. Moses took this mob of conquerors, killing and burning and conquering for 40 years. And here's a map showing where all scientists have been able to retrace the step of Moses and his mob. And of course, he kept gathering allies and wiping out enemies as he went. Finally, they get to a place where Moses is ordered up a mountain by Yahweh. Yahweh gives him these tablets and it tells him what to do. The first thing to do is make everybody only worship me and not any of the other gods. There aren't any other gods, it's only me. So tell the other gods you're not worshiping them anymore. And subjugate women was one of his big moves. Well, you know the Ten Commandments. Everybody knows the Ten Commandments. But the Ten Commandments got added on to till there's hundreds and hundreds of commandments. But anyway, Moses never lived to get all the way to the place where the Anunnaki had stored their major computer systems that was run by Adad in the area of modern Jerusalem. So then Joshua takes over from Moses, crosses the Jordan, and takes with his armies the rest of Canaan. And so now we're coming up to 1397 BCE, with Joshua now leading the Israelites. And the armies are wiping everybody before them, with a little help from Yahweh. King David defeated the Philistines, who, of course, their champion was one of the Ijiji, one of the great big Anunnaki. The Anunnaki were often very, very big. And so he established the kingdom of Judea. And he arranged for his ally in a battle, Uriah, the guy's name, was Hittite, to get exposed on purpose so he'd get killed. And then he married the guy's wife because he saw her bathing and turned on to her. So Yahweh was not pleased with David's behavior and would not let him build the temple, even though that's what Yahweh wanted, was the temple. So he let Solomon, David's kid, be the guy who supervised the building of the temple. Well, Solomon practiced peace. He was the total opposite of David. He built things, he traded, he was diplomatic, he was intelligent, he was a gentleman. In 931 BCE, Abraham's descendants through Isaac split the empire of that was following Yahweh into two, Israel and Judea, governed separately. Nebuchadnezzar in 587 BCE actually captured Jerusalem. He took the Israelite leaders to Babylon. These are the guys that are going to write the Bible, so that's a really important event. That's when they got to Babylon. Some of them were stationed in Haran. They worked on writing the Bible. And their task was to make it like, instead of all these gods, which are just Anunnaki, they're just lords from another planet with high technology and strength and psychic powers, but they were people. And so they were posing as gods already. And Yahweh said, nah, they ain't gods, I'm the only one. And so that's what the challenge was, to make that Yahweh the God of not just Israel, but the only God, and to not make him so identified with one place that he could be everywhere. And so that was what the challenge of the Bible writers had, to take all this ancient literature that they now had access to as Nebuchadnezzar's guests, and make some kind of cohesive writing out of it. And that's the beginning of the Old Testament. So Yahweh becomes a Anunnaki composite. He lacks temple, he lacks territory. It was a major intellectual challenge, how to take all that stuff and conflate all the Anunnaki into one personage. And they didn't disguise it very well. And we've been able to figure it out. In 539, Cyrus, who had made a deal with Yahweh, conquered Babylon. And he sent the Israelites back to Jerusalem. Those who wanted were returned from Haran and from Babylon. And they came back with their Bible to Jerusalem. After Alexander of Macedon conquered the world, and then he died, he was poisoned. He had already discovered that Marduk was his dad. But in any case, his general Ptolemy wound up, running things from Syria, that part of Alexander's empire, and the Syrians ruled Jerusalem, and they were determined to put the Greek gods, who by now were representing Marduk, in place of any worship of Yahweh. Well, Matthias Maccabeus just could not tolerate that Marduk and this satanic regime of Greek gods, which are really Marduk and his the people that were working with him, would rule the Jews, who Maccabeus felt were Yahweh's people, and he killed this priest, and he touched off a revolution. His kids and the armies of the Jews retook the Temple Mound. They drove the Seleucids, that's the descendants of Ptolemy, and that drove them back to Syria, got them out of Israel, and for 80 years, under the Maccabees, Israel was independent. During the Roman period, again, we have the imposition of people beholden to Marduk and his systems, who's now been established as the god of Rome. In 70 BC, Jerusalem was in turmoil with a peace faction led by Johann ben Zakkai, who said, look, it's futile for us to stand up to Rome. Look what they've got. Let's just make some kind of accommodation. If they let us run our internal affairs, we'll just pay them bucks and have them leave us alone. But the ones that wanted, the zealots that wanted war, started killing all the peaceniks. And Ben Zakkai was forced to pretend he was a corpse and be carried out of the city, because they were taking corpses out of the city. Otherwise, they weren't letting the peaceniks go out of the city. They wanted them to stay and help fight against Rome. So he was a great peacenik. Well, of course, the Romans did indeed take Jerusalem, and they burned Enlil's temple. The next event, and we'll have to hang on to this for the next show, of course, of huge importance, and is the coming of Jesus, who was a rabbi, a wise man among the Jews. But that's what you're going to get in another story. Thanks so much for listening so much to the beginning of this series on Abraham and his descendants, of which I am one. Thank you for listening. Here's some other books we wrote. And here's a book by my teacher in the middle, Zechariah Sitchin. I'm so glad you are watching my slides. Thank you so much.